Well, I think we can still have a good conversation here.
Yeah.
I thought about, preparing, but I I didn't. My
It's
preparing is
coffee time with Melissa and Amy.
I was there for your talk.
Yeah,
So,
we were there.
anyways, well, welcome to the podcast, Melissa Hogan. I had teased about this conversation our last time we had a podcast episode with you on it because I knew you were giving a talk at an upcoming conference, and I thought I'd give them first dibs on that. But I'm curious about your topic, and I thought having a casual conversation about it with everyone listening would be fun. So let's do this.
Well, as long as you're fine with the fact that I'm only on my second cup of coffee and
I've had one. I
drinking that
only had one. I
coffee.
could have used more. I'm real tired. So tell me about the premise of your talk, and we'll just go from there.
So the title of my talk was Searching for Safety After Abuse. And it really came from my own experience of, when you are leaving this toxic, abusive situation, all you want is to be
Right.
safe. And in therapy, I learn after the fact. When you're in it, you don't realize this is what they're doing, but their first goal is to stabilize you. And that, is the sense of getting that sense of grounding and safety. And, you can't start to deal with things until you feel safe. So it came from my own journey of the things that I did to
Yeah.
try to feel safe and what that looked like in terms of the evolution of looking for safe people and safe communities and then a safe life and what I kind of learned and concluded through that about what you can and can't have
Yeah.
and the balance you have to inevitably find in that search for safety.
Yeah. As you're talking about that, I was thinking about the different steps that you talked about walking through. And then I also was thinking about grief and the, I don't know if they've been debunked as being stages of grief, but like they're definitely different things people walk through, but that they're sort of fluid where you may find yourself at different places at different times or like moving back, moving forward and then moving back. But I think what you said about that starting place of looking for stability is a really interesting thing. 'Cause I don't think people can get anywhere really healthy if you don't start with that stability piece. Tell me about what that looked like or what you would kind of maybe what it looked like for you and how you would suggest people try to lean into that themselves for stability.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I talked about in terms of safe people and that, I really shrunk my world
Hmm.
into a very small group of people that were themselves stable and healthy and supportive because when you're, just drowning, again, you can't save other people. You're trying to, stay above water yourself. And so if you have this small group of people who are supportive and healthy, and they can constantly remind you this is what healthy looks like in
Hmm.
both their own behavior and their worlds and in their support of you, that's, starts to pave the way for coming out of survival mode because that's
Yeah.
really what you're in. And as you know, because you were in that small circle of
Hmm.
safe, healthy people, you know, I needed to have people remind me of who I was, remind me of what was true, remind me of what was good, remind me that I was safe. I actually had at some point put a lock screen on my phone, and this was in 2019.
Mm.
I realized I would come home to my house where a lot of unhealthy, unsafe things had happened, and I would start to panic inside. And how do I combat that? Well, you normally have your phone with you. So I'd put a lock screen on my phone that said, "You are safe, you are loved, you are strong."
Mm.
And so when I couldn't necessarily have a person of that group of safe people around me, I could have something on my phone to remind me of those things that they were pouring into me, that God was pouring into me, that I was safe at this point, physically safe, emotionally safe for the most part. Had to start from that place, but I was safe, I was loved by these people, and that I was strong and growing stronger.
If somebody's listening and saying, I don't even know how I would start with that, what would you say to that? Like where would somebody look around them to say, I'm in a bad place and I really do need some stability and structures that remind me of what is true? Where would they find it?
Yeah, I think there's several different options. For me, two of the grounding places were in therapy with a
Mhm.
therapist and with a support group. And I do understand and acknowledge that comes from a place of privilege in a lot of ways. Therapy is expensive. Even finding a good therapist who understands whatever situation you've been in, whether it's abuse or trauma in different forms, but that can provide that mirror to you of like, this is what I'm seeing, this is what you're telling me, and this is what's true and what's healthy. But then support groups, there are a lot of free support groups.
Yeah.
Mine is a domestic abuse support group. And the first time I went there, and you start to hear other people's stories and realize they're so similar to yours, it starts to chip away also at that sense of, am I crazy?
Mhm.
Like, did this really happen? Was this really as bad as I thought it was? And you start to hear all these similarities, and it helps bolster that sense of, no, I know what I experienced. I know, what happened, and that it was bad. So like
Mhm.
support groups, therapy, support groups, people, what I realized too is there were people in my life that had filled certain roles at different times that were kind of surrogates, whether they were
Mm.
surrogates for parental figures or other things. And looking back, that like, who did I go to when this happened?
Mm.
The first person I went to, like early on in my marriage, when there was an affair of my then husband, was not a friend. It
Mm.
wasn't a parent. It was actually a parental figure
Mm.
in my church. And so, looking in your life and say, there's a subconscious draw to certain people who are
Yeah.
safe and have fulfilled those roles. And so identifying those more formally, like, oh,
Yeah.
this was that figure in my life, and recognizing that, and keeping them or bringing them into this circle of safe people that you have.
I like that. I think if people look around them too, they may consider looking at some of the non-traditional communities or not necessarily the people that are like the upfront leaders in all of them. It could be somebody that's sort of always quietly been in the periphery, living their life in a stable way that you just say, that person feels safe to me.
Yes.
And maybe you could just invite them in to your experience a little bit. I love what you said about the variety of different things. This looking for stability is probably not going to come from just one source. What would you say about that?
That's absolutely true. And that's too much of a burden to place on one source. And that's one of the things I talked about in my talk is we can, while we are floundering, we can unintentionally burden people with saving us from our drowning.
Mm.
And for people who don't know, like that was one of the things I did to you. When you are drowning, you grab for whatever looks like a life preserver. And there were many times I grabbed for you
Mm,
that now in reflection wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. And at the time, again, you can't see it. You can't see the potential damage you're doing to other people and how you might pull them under.
mm,
And I think as you grow healthier and stronger, um, you can look at that and see that and own that and apologize for that.
mm.
And I've probably said it, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did that to you.
I forgive you. I mean, I think we do the best we know at the time. And I mean, I think I was also in that, like, sure, I'll throw myself in.
Yeah.
Um, so
'Cause you're a helper
it
and you,
made it easy
yeah.
until I needed people on the outside of me saying, what's happening? What are you doing?
That,
Yeah.
that proves the point. Like you need a community of people because, yeah, sometimes you are completely drowning.
Mhm.
And I
This
have to admit,
looking for community and trying to even find stability is messy. I think that acknowledging that that is going to be messy and the fact that you are likely healing from some unhealthy relationships is going to make it hard as you're dealing with people even that are part of helping you in this new, safer, more stable life. Is that there's going to be times when there's pushback from even those people that are providing great support for you. And it's may trigger your brain to be like, danger, danger. I don't want to do this again. Maybe none of this is worth it. Or, maybe I can't trust Amy. No, I think that there will be those times of like, none of this is working. And the thing I thought was working, the thing I thought was helping, maybe it's not. Well, no, maybe not. Maybe it's just life.
yeah,
This is going to be a little messy. And the only way you'll know that this is a healthy s- thing that's going to help the stability and your growth is time and
yeah,
seeing how things play out. It's not somebody saying yes all the time. It's not, it's just going to be what happens after the conflict or what happens after the messy
resolution.
thing. Is there repair? Is there distance? Is there people willing to give each other grace? You won't know that until you walk through it. And I'm just sorry. I'm just sorry to say you're going to have to. And hopefully some of those bumps will come a little bit farther in, but they may come really early on. And we're all in different stages of health, even the people that are going to be your most healthy, helpful friends. Any given
Well,
day, any given time, and discerning between the toxic and the still learning imperfect is a life skill that we're going to learn together.
that's a good way to clarify it. And I will also add in the group of safe people, they may not all be people because as I was sitting here feeling emotional, my dog, who is my
Mm,
son's service dog, who before she was a service dog was basically an emotional support dog through my divorce and COVID and all those things. And so having a special animal is also a
yeah.
good way to feel loved and to give love.
Certain structures and routines can also be really good. Like knowing that the library is going to be open every day from this time to this time, and you can go there, and that can be a safe place for you, or going to the rec center, your yoga classes or regularly moving your body and going for a walk can be a very grounding, stabilizing thing. And going for a walk doesn't cost anything. I mean, some people are so in the weeds and have so many things going on in their life. It is sort of a luxury to do some of those things. So you've got a kid, a young kid or a baby. I see your dog like leaning in and saying, "Are you okay? I, are we
Well,
good? Are we
and
good?"
what
Yeah.
you said too about people that maybe in the periphery of your life, realizing that some of them may end up being your safe people. That existed for me as well because I was very good at compartmentalizing what was happening and putting on a very brave face. I had to do that with my
Mhm.
youngest son's disease and doing advocacy and running a nonprofit and you couldn't stand there and cry when you're talking at a pharmaceutical conference, even though
Yeah.
it affects your child. But I then effectively did that in all of these other areas. But learning to let that down a little bit, I found opening that door in places where I wasn't necessarily close to people, which was like at my kids' school. I mean, obviously, as things went down and it was really bad and bad things were happening, there were lots of meetings at the school. And realizing that actually the principal and the athletic director and the school basketball coach were safe people.
Mhm.
And my son that was in those meetings realized they were safe people and he wanted to tell them more. And, and they walked a lot of this with it. People that worked for the juvenile court,
Mhm.
women at my yoga studio where I go to. If you're willing to open that door just a little bit, you can start to have more connections with people that your body knows are safe.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about how you were good at compartmentalizing. I would say in some ways in faith communities, often we're kind of told to like throw all our eggs in this one faith community basket. And that can be something to untangle and maybe deconstruct as you're getting healthy too, to be like, maybe not every spoke in my support structure needs to come from the same neighborhood, the same church. I mean, like,
Company.
diversify your life, because what happens if that goes away? You realize you've lost everything. And maybe to look around and say, who did I sort of exclude because they weren't in the club with me that was willing to be a friend to me this whole time? I just disqualified them in my mind because they went to a different church. They
Well,
went to a different school. They're in a different district, that sort of thing.
there's a huge risk in that because when we draw all these things from one singular place, whether that's our support system, and especially if it's in addition to that, like our income and our faith community from one place, then if something is awry, the temptation to subconsciously ignore it, the betrayal blindness,
Mhm.
or to overtly ignore it or cover it up or go, we'll resolve that from the inside. We don't need to tell anybody. That becomes so much stronger when everything you have, even if it's just your support system, but especially if it's everything else, is consolidated in that one place. You lose so
Yeah.
much more. You are so much more at risk by standing up for something or disclosing something or reporting something.
That's good. All right. So you talked about more than just stability. You moved on and you gave this really great analogy about the cocoon and the value that the cocoon stage is. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I talked about cocoons with various insects or animals and also like unhealthy cocoons that can exist. But a cocoon for them is a place for safety and protection and transformation. So I feel like if we look at our immediate support system, which is this tight, small community, again, similar to a cocoon in that way, as is not this permanent place where we're going to be forever, which by the way, I thought I was going to be. I thought I don't need any more friends
Yeah.
ever. I don't need any other relationships. I thought I would never be in a and never intended to be in a romantic relationship again. Um, because I had this cocoon and I thought that's what's going to keep me safe. And I shared that, as you know, like I watched cult and abuse documentaries
Mhm.
for basically 2 years, at least 2 years. And that's
Mm.
mostly what I watched to try to, I thought that if I could identify how to detect abusers and unsafe people and narcissists that I could protect myself. And so that was this cocoon I was winding around myself that I thought I was going to stay in forever to protect myself. But the point of a cocoon is transformation. And for survivors, that's healing and growth. And at some point, we come out of that. And you don't, early on, you don't think you ever will.
Yeah.
You don't ever want to, you don't think it would ever be safe, but then we can just stay stagnant and never grow or heal ourselves and look at how did we end up in that place? I had to do what's called family of origin work. Like, how did I become drawn to this type of person? How
Mm.
did I stay in that situation knowing that certain things were happening, certain things I didn't know or realize and didn't appreciate for a long time? But, I accepted affairs, controlling behavior, degrading things. Why would I do that? So doing the work of going back, how did I end up there? And growing and understanding that. And that is actually part of how you help prevent that from happening to you again. That is when you can kind of come out of that cocoon and you transform, and you're never totally safe. So you're
Mm.
never this beautiful butterfly who just flits off in I had to realize
The
I'm
work is done.
yeah, the work
Everything
is
is great.
done. But we're going to encounter unhealthy people. We are going to be unhealthy in certain ways that
Hmm.
we're going to have
Hmm.
to acknowledge and own. We're going to encounter abusive people, deceitful people. And part of that growth is being able to hold the tension of walking in this world and encountering people and being healed enough that we're not triggered all the time,
Yeah.
but that we also have the coping skills to deal with things, and we have the self-care. I was frustrated for a long time and still sometimes get frustrated with the level of self-care that I need in order to maintain an equilibrium.
Mm.
And but then I have to remind myself, here are the things that have happened in your life, that have happened in the past, and the things that I'm still wrestling with and dealing with on a daily basis, and not allowing myself to shame myself. These are some of the things you need in order to maintain that equilibrium and continue to have a soft heart for people that have harmed you and that you are still hopeful for their repentance and healing. I just operate in the world a lot differently now than when I did before.
Yeah. What are some examples of overstaying the cocoon that you can think of either personally or just in general, or both, that you maybe when it applies to maybe the survivor community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for anyone to tell anyone else that they're
Yep.
overstaying their cocoon.
Yep.
So if somebody is judging you in that way, that's not healthy or helpful.
Yeah.
If that's a conversation to be had, it should come from somebody that's in your cocoon with you.
Hmm.
Um, but some signs could be if you're not actively looking at how do I heal these things and identifying your still unhealed places. If we're really continuing to focus on the harm out of balance with good things and good things in our life, good things that we're doing, ways that we can continue to grow and heal and taking joy from that. Not to pat myself on the back, but I was really intentional about healing and reclaiming things. So I would call it that. I intend to reclaim this place. I'm a big place person. I love to travel, but
Hmm.
there were a lot of places in the story that had been tainted by lots of deception and harm and cheating and different things. But they were places that I loved, and I did not want them to continue to be stained for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So I intentionally set up trips to those places. And I had times of my life, there were only short windows of time where I was not caring for my kids, or especially for my youngest son. So I would have like 2 weeks in the summer
Mhm.
and like a week at Christmas. And I would go to these places that were really important to me and intentionally try to work through the things that had happened there or the relationships that were broken there. And because I wanted to have that place back in my life. One place is Lake Tahoe. It's
Mhm.
gorgeous. I had good memories there, but I had lots of, in reflection, bad things that happened. And then they're like reclaiming relationships. Like there were people that I wanted to forgive them, And forgiveness is not just, oh, I forgive this person. I mean, that's very superficial, but to really work through, examine what they had done, how the ways in which it had hurt you, the ways that it hurt your relationship, and look at it full-faced, transparently, and work through the forgiveness. So some of those trips were going to a place, and sometimes I would end up working on forgiveness of somebody that I hadn't intended
Yeah.
to focus on and wrestle through, especially things in my childhood. And like, oh, I want to forgive this specific thing, but it's not that easy. You got to work through it.
Yeah. I think sometimes we know that we've emerged from the cocoon because something happens that reminds us that we're not safe. And we're like, oh crap, okay, how do I
Oh,
get back
go
in
back.
there? Like, I didn't want to be, I never was going to be here again. I told myself I wasn't going to be in this situation. And I think everyone's going to have that moment. They're going to have a moment where they realize that, oh, I said I was never going to be in a relationship again because I knew something might happen. And then there is that you need to have a what happens next moment of you can't go back in the cocoon. I mean, you can try. You c- it's not going to serve you.
Well, and I mean, at that point, you also are working at discerning, is this actually an unsafe situation or an
Yeah.
unsafe person, or is this just normal conflict, or we are human? And one of the things I talked about in the talk is I feel like there is a temptation when we come from a community that we thought was safe and that, maybe gaslit us in ways that we questioned ourselves,
Mhm.
unjustifiably questioned
Yeah,
ourselves.
yeah.
We had to eventually learn, no, I know what I'm talking about. I know what happened. I know this was unhealthy. And so when we've had to convince ourselves of that, I think there's a temptation to get stuck in that
Hmm.
insistence that we are right and that
Hmm.
we know. And it can really lean into a self-righteousness and into an inability to examine our own behavior and think that that if we hurt in some way, that it must be because that person is abusive or unsafe or harmful, instead of holding this tension of going, well, that's possible, but it's also possible that this is typical conflict,
Yeah.
that there's other situations at play, but realizing that we don't have to be so insistent about being right all the time,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
we can hold that tension and still examine, am I being gaslit? Is this person actually harmful, or is this just normal conflict that we can potentially resolve
Hmm.
as two humans?
Yeah, this is one of the trickiest things I think about being a human in the world is holding that tension of in the past, I was diminished and told not to trust myself. And now I learned to trust myself. And now I need to really self-reflect if I'm being self-righteous. What am I getting wrong? Because I can be wrong sometimes and still get things right. I can still get things right and get things wrong. And not to shame spiral or just be like, okay, it's all bad again. It's really, really hard. I mean, you talked about how we are not all safe ourselves all the time. And man, the times that I have not been safe or people have communicated that they haven't experienced me as safe, I have felt so much shame. I just has been like one of the hardest things for me to think through what is true and what is mine in a way that is honest.
Right.
That's so, so hard. Why do we have to do that? Why? Why? Why, Melissa?
You and I talk about this,
How
whereas
can I never, like with my dad said in therapy, how do I never end up in this place again? Bless you, Dad. What do I need to do to make this never happen again? And I just don't know that there's a never happen again. There is a maybe shorten the cycle of like, oh, I'm recognizing the sign that I need to reflect. I think it's okay to take time if you feel like what is true about myself in this situation.
Yeah.
I need to think about it. I need to ask somebody else. And I need to honestly ask myself as well. That's going to be the lifelong journey of all of us and being willing to surround yourself with people that are willing to be like, well, I do love you, but maybe this thing here could have been different.
I think having those people in our lives that we have said ahead of time, that we've given permission to speak those hard words to us is
Mhm.
really important because we're not going to be perfect all the time. We're not going to never hurt somebody again, hopefully unintentionally. We are going to potentially swing back and forth between questioning myself unjustifiably to over here self-righteousness and pride because we're imperfect people. And, having people that can give you a little gut check, a little come to Jesus is good. And that's, I think, comes from long relationships. It comes from deep relationships. It comes from going through a lot of stuff
Yeah.
together. And that's probably whoever people in that core little people that were in your cocoon.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the survivor community itself right now and how you talked about how, there's no safe, perfectly safe community. And how we have talked, even amongst ourselves, is that every community has the same pitfalls and the same dynamics can play out in every one. And I think we sometimes forget that when we leave an unhealthy community and we have built a new community in our lives or joined a new place that we find a lot of support from, is the same dynamics probably will work its way out there in that new community at some point. Tell me if you want to talk about that or if you don't. I mean, it will happen. I mean, these are imperfect systems. We are all in. So tell me your thoughts on that.
The community we go to help us after a harmful situation or relationship or community, we want to perceive that as enlightened,
Mhm.
right? That they know, they understand, so they're not going to do the same things. And I think there's a reason we want to believe that. Yes, they do often get it what it is we're experiencing or what we're talking about, whether that's the survivor community or if we've had toxic fundamentalism or conservative evangelicalism, and we go to like progressive community or faith, we want to believe that, well, that's enlightened and that's not going to happen there. But communities are just made up of people. And people are both imperfect, people can be unhealthy, and people can be wolves. And wolves were in the last community, they're going to be in this community. And I think the key is to focus on our own individual growth and transformation. And especially one of the things I talked about was like our discernment. I don't think we can get to a place, like I said, with my cult and abuse documentary watching that we can figure everything out.
Right.
But, a lot of that discernment is in prayer and in ongoing grounding in who Jesus is and our relationship with him. And if that is the anchor versus I kind of think of like he's the post in the ground. And, I'm on a line that swings out from the post, but man, I'm held by that post.
Mhm.
And if that post is a human, man, you're going to get hurt. Or if you've got Jesus there and you've got a bunch of other human gurus or people you admire that you're also tethered to, that's not going to be good either.
Mhm.
I think we have to hold everybody, whether they're in an enlightened community or a survivor community, we have to hold them loosely and constantly look at, their words versus their actions, their fruit in the way of the fruit of the Holy Spirit, not their fruit as in numbers.
Yeah.
We tend
Yeah.
as humans to want to look at fruit as, well, look how big it is, look at the influence, look at, that is not fruit.
Look at all the books they sold. Yeah.
Right. Their fruit is the fruit of the Spirit.
Hmm.
And often you can't detect that in a wide swath. You can't detect that from the platform. You
Yeah.
can't detect that from the audience. That fruit is in their personal relationships. And if you're not in personal relationship with them, it is really hard for you to do you know, we don't know. Sometimes we get insight into those personal relationships when something comes out
Hmm.
related to maybe a lawsuit or how they've treated people that are in their personal sphere. And I would say pay attention to that
Hmm.
because that's the things people don't want you to see. That may be a sign that the fruit of the spirit is not there, despite what you see as like the worldly fruit of a ministry or a
Right.
book or a brand or something like that.
Yeah. And it might just be not the place for you to be. Like, okay, I don't need to engage in this deeply in this part of this world, or I need to or maybe some of that discerning or discomfort sometimes we get is a sign that like, oh, this cocoon served me really well for a while, but maybe there's another place. Am I running away because I'm uncomfortable, or am I outgrowing a community that I just loved and bless for what it gave me at the time? But there's a new place for me or a different way of being in that. I think of like Lorianne Thompson, who has been such an encouragement to me personally and to so many people, who has really tried to embody like how she engages in the world, in the survivor world, because she knows what it does to her
Mhm.
psyche. She knows what it does to her, emotionally and physically to be in that. And so she'll dip in and out in a way that she feels like is healthy. And I think that's such a great modeling of it, which tells the story of that woman in one of the Canadian provinces that, spent their whole life dedicated to like advocacy after she had been so harmed. And that ended up all the advocacy work and digging into that world for so long ended up taking that woman's life from her in the end. And she says, I didn't come this far. I didn't survive to not live. I didn't come this far to not live. And if you're finding yourself in a place, I think where you feel like you're not living, that's a wake-up call for all of us. And hopefully we get there before a crisis.
Yeah. And I think there is a temptation to have to make something out of
Mm.
our pain.
It's
Might
such a
talk
Christian
about-
thing.
I
It's such
know
a
it.
Christian thing.
I no longer think that you have to do that. I mean, there is very specific dealing with this in the Bible in terms of like God comforts you in a situation so that you may comfort others.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean we have to turn it into a thing. And often we think we do. They've even talked like the last stage of healing is this making something positive out of it. And I mean, while I think that can be true, we kind of put a lot of constraints about what that looks like often. We have to be an advocate, we have to be outspoken. Like it can just be one relationship. Like
Yeah.
it can also just be our own internal transformation about it. And as you know, and a lot of people know, with my youngest son's disease, I founded a nonprofit and ran that for 5 years until I couldn't in the middle of my divorce. I do think there, there are specific things behind that I knew God called me to do that.
Hmm.
Because he drug me into it kicking and screaming. I did not want to do it. But uh, I knew that that was something benefiting other people and good for them. It was good for my son. It did make something positive out of what we were dealing with. And I felt like it used the skills I had as a lawyer and as a strategy consultant and turned that into something that would be long lasting and is long lasting for for a lot of people and helping people. But I don't think we have to do something like that with every circumstance of pain that we have.
Yeah.
And it really took losing my middle son to go, I don't have to turn that into anything. I don't
Hmm.
have to be an advocate about, you know, for people who don't know, he died of an accidental drug overdose. I don't have to become an advocate about fentanyl, the harm of kids numbing experiences of abuse and trauma and pain. I can just live in that and honor my son in my life
Yeah.
and in the conversations I have. And I don't have to turn it into something. Now, somebody could say by speaking about it, or my speech at Restore was really the first time I talked publicly.
Hmm.
And that was really a milestone for me
Hmm.
to be able to say, as you know, like the night before, I really had a like come to Jesus moment because mm,
Yeah.
because what I was doing there was sharing my pain with the room and in some ways dispersing that. And part of me wanted to hold that all to
Hmm.
myself.
Yeah.
That if I could hold on to the grief and the pain of my son, I wouldn't partially let him go. But I knew I needed that for me. I needed to disperse and share a little bit of that pain for my own healing and to acknowledge that he existed and there were wonderful parts of him and I loved him and love him and am grieving. And so that was really a milestone for me. It wasn't about making something out of that pain. And so I think that's still transformation. That is still positive for us, but it just doesn't have to be this big
Yeah.
that often the church world or the survivor community makes that we've got to be this super advocate. It can be these small little ways and relationships and healing that we have.
Yeah. And we need the people that do the different things. We need the outspoken, forceful advocates, and we need the people that are like Lorianne, who's, checking in on people, checking out people that just are showing up in a space and being there from time to time. Those are all really valuable things. We just don't always see it play out because not everything is a public display of meaning making or moving on in a healthy way that honors the thing that we experienced and the wisdom that we gained, but also says, I have a place in this world that is bigger than the worst thing that happened to me. And that's okay. I mean, I think not want to be introduced as the worst thing that happened to you can be a healthy a healthy thing.
We are all a tapestry
Hmm.
where nobody wants to be defined as this terrible thing. And
But there
really,
can be comfort there, and because it's what you know,
Mhm.
right? Even though we don't totally really want to be defined that way, but if you know that, it's easy to stay there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I
So,
would love to be known by all these wonderful things in my life too, like these wonderful friends I have, the things that give me joy. Like I love hot yoga and I love backpacking. And I need those things often to counterbalance some of the really difficult things that have happened or some of the work I do that is emotionally challenging.
mhm.
And I think realizing we are all this tapestry of the things that have happened to us, will happen, the challenges in our life, the joys, the relationships, and it can be beautiful.
Yeah. Tell me about that beauty that you challenged us with at the end of your talk at Restore.
One of the things I had to come to realize was there is no completely safe life. And terribly, like the loss of my son is what made me have to realize that because I thought I
Hmm.
didn't realize this afterwards that essentially I was having this argument with God that was, hey, I already have a sick child that I've been trying to save for 15 years and will most likely still lose.
Hmm.
This is not fair. It is
Yeah.
not fair for me to lose another child. And coming to a place of acceptance that there is no completely safe life. And it is this tapestry, it is this journey, and being able to look along the way at the really beautiful parts and take them in and hold them tenderly, like looking at the beautiful parts of my son that I lost and look at the beautiful parts of my son that has special needs and there are just joys there that he is a gift
Yeah.
that God has given me and given everybody who knows him. And I could look at the terrible parts of like he's lost so many skills in the last 6 years. And if people don't know, it's a progressive terminal illness that he has. But man, that joy, he got baptized in the last year, working through that with my church. And what does that look like to recognize that someone who's 17 years old, but with the cognitive ability of maybe a 2 or 3 year old,
Hmm.
but was higher at one point, how do you recognize that they have a relationship with Jesus and have a profession of faith? And what does that look like in terms of baptism? Like, there is a beauty there that I
Hmm.
just can't wrap my arms around sometimes. And then being now in a relationship that is healthy and good and wonderful and but also still human. So
And terrifying.
yes, and it's terrifying. It is this continual balance of grief. I will always have the grief.
Yeah.
Grief will always be there. But there's also just such beautiful things and walking the grief out with people you love and who love you and bringing joy to one another. Like that's a beautiful thing too, because you can't see the beauty unless you see the opposite. It becomes so much more special and significant and poignant when you realize that there is another extreme.
Yeah. And what if it's beautiful?
Yeah.
I love that. Well, thanks for sharing about that with me. We didn't really prepare for this, but I think it worked out okay.
They're always good. It's coffee with Melissa and Amy. And by the way, this was a mug that my son gave me, my son that I lost. You can feel free not to show what it says.
Oh, it blurred. Oh, oh, there we go.
He was
Perfect.
funny like that. He was really
Yes.
funny. And he laughed so hard when he gave me this mug. And so I love it. And I was going to use it today for our
Yeah.
conversation.
I think it's a great illustration of the beauty and the edge.
Mhm.
And there just comes a point where you're like, oh boy, I'm in it now. Might as well live.
Yep.
Might as well live. It's too late now. I got myself in this. I got myself into this thing. I got myself into a friendship. I got myself into a relationship that I said I was never going to do. But what are you going to do now?
Yeah. Well, like parenting too. I think we've
Yeah.
said if we had known parenting would be this complicated and this painful at times and this confusing, and would we have gotten into it?
Right. And the honest mama often says, I don't know if I would, but I sure love my kids so much. And I don't want to miss these wonderful things about it. But there are days where I think, man,
Woo!
what if I hadn't? I was just talking to our friend, mutual friend Heather today, who was talking to someone who just had a baby and was saying, hey, if you feel like you love this baby so much, but you like regret all the things and you wish you didn't have one, just know I've been there. And if you've never felt that, forget I ever said that and like just move on with life. But we need the people in our lives that acknowledge that it's okay to have deep regrets and fears and also notice that there's great beauty in it all too. So thanks,
I
Melissa.